Hey guys, continuing with our bike setup series, in this video we're going to talk about how to set your suspension up. So this is probably one of the most complex things on the bike, is getting your suspension just right. And the reality is, ideally you might want some help with this, because modern suspension's really finicky. There's lots of things you can set and it's quite complex to do. Definitely a good option for doing this is something like a shock whiz, where you can actually put that on, ride around with it, and it gives you data back onto your phone, and you can tune your suspension to get it really spot on. What we're going to do though is we're going to start with the basics and just get you some rule of thumb settings to get the bike basically handling correctly. And then if you want to fine tune it with something like a shock whiz or play with the settings a bit more past that point, then get out there and go for it. So the first thing you always need to set on your suspension is going to be your sag. Now the sag is basically how hard or how soft your suspension is. So it's like changing the strength of the spring. And if you're using a spring-based suspension rather than air, then that's what you would be doing. You need to get the right weight spring in your suspension system. We're playing with air at the moment, so that's something you can actually adjust. Now, you need a degree of sag because your suspension operates both ways. So you don't want it to be sitting at the maximum, you want it to be sitting down a little bit, and then as the wheel goes into a bump, it can drop in and it can also compress upwards. So you do need a little bit of sag. Now the way you set sag, ideally it works better if you've got some assistance, but I'm just doing it by myself. So what you're going to do is jump on your bike, you can roll around a bit, get yourself in a nice ready position. I'm just using the tree here to stabilize myself. Okay, so in a ready position, bounce up and down a little bit, so you're nice and balanced on your bike. And then what you want to do is ideally have somebody else move your little adjusters. You've got the little rubber stops on your fork and your shock. Have them move those down till they're sitting against the fork leg. So from here, it's a little bit awkward to do by myself. I'm just going to sit down and do it. I can slide that down and I can slide the shock one up. Okay, so I'm in my ready position. That's nice and stable at about the right suspension height. So now the trick is to get off the bike nice and gently so that you're not going to move that around too much. And then that'll let your suspension come back to its normal place. Now that distance that the little rubber stopper is your sag. On some shocks, they'll actually have markings on there for the percentage. Others don't, so you've got to kind of estimate it. So your starting rule of thumb, if you're running suspension that's sort of 100, 120 mil, you probably want to be sitting around about 20% sag. As you go to longer travel suspension, so like 130, 140, 150, up even to 160, you're probably running around the 25%, and 160 and up, you can be up into the 30, even 35% sag. So that gives you a start point. Now, it's not going to be necessarily where you're going to leave it, but that will get you pretty close. Now, the next thing then is to go for a ride. And ideally, you want to be using most of your suspension travel on the trails you normally ride. So there's not much point in having 160 mil of travel and having the bike pumped up super hard so that when you normally ride it, you only use 30% of your travel. So ideally, you don't want it to be bottoming out, but you also want to use as much of the stroke as you can. So if you go out for a ride, set your little rubber pieces down and go for a bit of a ride and see how much travel you're using. And on your normal sort of trails, there should be a couple of points in the ride where you're using most of the travel. And that way you'll know that your sag's pretty right. Now, obviously adjusting this, you need a shock pump, so you can put air into your fork and into your shock. I'm not going to show you particularly how to do that because they're all a little bit different, but typically they'll have a valve that you can put a shock pump on. So that'll get your basics right with the sag. The other thing that we're going to talk about is rebound. Now, rebound is basically how fast the suspension comes up after you've compressed it. Now, if you're riding on chattery sort of small corrugations, what you want it to do is you want the rebound a little bit faster, because as the suspension goes down, you want it to come back up again quite quickly. Otherwise, you tend to get a pump effect where you sort of go down a bit on each one and the suspension never really returns, and you start to lose performance out of the suspension. So that would be a faster rebound. Now, going the other way, the disadvantage of a faster rebound is if you're going off big jumps and you're hitting the ground really hard on landings, then it's going to spring you back up in the air again. So if you're riding terrain where you're taking more big hits, you're going to be setting your rebound a little bit slower. Now, a good start point to test it is just how fast your bike comes back up. So if I'm going to stand at the back of my bike here, I'm going to push down and then release some load. So let the bike spring up and down. Sorry. Just get rid of that helmet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand at the back of the bike here. I'm going to push down and let it come back up. And you'll notice that it's sort of staying with me as it comes up. If you push it down and take your hands off and it really, really lags behind, then the rebound's probably a bit too slow. If you push down and it shoves your hands back again, the rebound's probably a little bit fast. So by doing this simple test, front and back, you can do the same thing with front suspension. Just push down and see how it returns. That'll give you a bit of a feel for the start point on your rebound. Once you've started riding, what you want to do is try your rebound a little bit faster, try the rebound a bit slower. Make sure you record where you started from so you can always go back to a start point, and that way you'll start to get a little bit of a feel for the changes in handling of the bike. So hopefully this has been useful. Great way to just get the start point dialed for your suspension. Ideally, once again, something like a Shock Whiz is awesome. A lot of bike shops actually hire them, so you don't have to go to the trouble of buying one, and that will sort of help you tune it really, really well. But to get started, you can certainly get your sag set correctly, you can get your rebound set pretty close, and a little bit of fiddling with it, you should be able to get the bike handling just how you want. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully it was really useful, and we'll see you out on the trails.